Hellcat the world, that's what everybody tells us we need to do, and that's what Stellantis has been trying to do. And well, thank you. I'm so glad they're doing that. And that's what we've got here, boys and girls. We've got the Hellcat behind us. That's right, not the 392. Don't get confused with their marketing. The 392, 6.4, and 5.7. It's a 6.2 liter supercharged Hellcat. That's the Hellcat. That's what you want. It's good for 702 horsepower and 650 pound-feet of torque. One of the things Ram bragged about in 2021 when they first came out with this in the TRX, that it's the most powerful engine ever put into a half-ton truck, and I hate to say it, it still is. The Raptor R is only 700 horsepower, so Ram boys, you still got that bragging, right? And it's still there. This sucker is good for 0 to 60, and Ram says very conservatively and very humbly 4.5 seconds. We all know that's BS because we can get 4.1 ourselves on a hot day. We've actually gotten 3.9 before. Other publications have actually gotten 3.7, so we know this baby can scoot. And now what that does mean is it's not good on mileage. EPA is actually rating this sucker because it's not a 3/4 ton truck, so it's on the window sticker, and there it is. 10 city, 14 highway, 12 combined, and I'm here to tell you, we got 10 is what we got driving around, but that's because underneath here there's a supercharger. In fact, there's a 2.3 liter, almost 2.4 liter if you round it up, IHI supercharger, and that sucker makes some intoxicating noise that you want to hear all the time. So you constantly just hit the right pedal and you get the good feelings, and you just keep hearing it over and over and over, which means your gas mileage, well, actually we saw the 9s actually a lot. So to be honest, that's where we're at. It is paired to the wonderful and glorious ZF 8-speed transmission. Why doesn't everybody put that in a truck or a car or anything ever made ever? I don't know, it confounds me, but it's in here and it's beautiful. It always shifts when you want it to. It never shifts when you don't want it to. It doesn't surprise you. It holds gears when you want it to. It's perfect. The paddles shift quick. Watch our other video for the placement of the paddles. We have a little bit of beef there, but the paddles work great. The actual shifter itself is in the right direction, up for down, down for up. I know that's confusing, but that's the way it should be. It's beautiful. The supercharger will actually go to 14,600 RPM and give you 11 PSI boost. So pretty impressive. And the other thing that's impressive about this is not only, Brian's going to get into the off-road part, and that's going to be the fun stuff because this thing can go at speed on dirt, but you can still tow 8,100 pounds with that. That's pretty cool. Not a lot of off-road vehicles that can do that at speed with a soft suspension and still tow. That's hard to do. It has a lower end transfer case that works quite well. It's a 264:1 ratio, crawl ratio. And this air box, I want to talk about this air box. This sucker is good for 32 liters per minute of sucking air in. That's what you got to do. And it's designed to do it in dusty environments, a massive air filter. And y'all have all seen this before. Not the first one on the internet to show it, but that right there, that's it sucking down a Raptor in the TRX. Nothing new there. Y'all have all seen it, but pretty cool. Glad they did it. Last but not least, it's a cast iron block, which means it's heavy. Basically, they did that because they needed this thing to hold up to the power because they weren't messing around. And they've done a good job with that. With that, let's turn it over to Brian and see why this thing can go so fast off-road at the same time and see what he's got to say.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is the best freaking part of the technical review, and that is the nuts and bolts portion. I wasn't ready for that, but we also start with the rubber, and as you can tell, this thing's freaking tall. It's a 35-inch. Well, it's not. It's a 325, 65, 18, but it measures out to 35 inches. These are the Goodyear Wrangler ATs, not the MTs, but the tread pattern looks a lot like the Max Track. MT is not mud terrain on these. But I do want to say I've criticized this line of tire before. These were actually really quiet. I was really happy with them, to the point that if I bought this truck, I would keep them. This thing weighs in at 91 pounds, 91.6 pounds. That was lighter than we thought it was going to be. Something I do want to point out is this is a non-bead lock on this truck. The bead lock rim is almost 10 pounds or 9 pounds heavier all around. The other thing I want to point out is that this is an 18 instead of a 17 like you find on the Raptors. That gives you less sidewall, but it gives you bigger brakes. And that was a choice that Ram made, and that was important to them. Okay, something I want to get out of the way right away. This thing has Bilstein shocks, and they're freaking awesome. And there's not 4 of them, there's 5 of them. We'll get to that in just a second. The most important thing is that this architecture is surprisingly similar to the regular Ram, but it is 6 inches wider in track width. That means that each side is 3 inches further out, which means you have a different design upper, lower control arm, longer axle shafts, and different sway bars. So that front lower control arm is really beefy. It's huge and it's designed for impacts. It actually looks a lot like the Raptor design, but this thing seems really thick. So Ram was really concerned about that. Something else, that upper control arm is also forged aluminum like the lower, where some Raptors are stamped steel uppers. So Ram took it a step further. The other thing, the knuckle in the middle, that's not steel, that's cast aluminum. The whole point of doing this is reducing unsprung weight. That makes driving dynamics better, and that makes up for heavy wheels and tires. That's a good thing that they did there. Also, it's very, very strong. Okay, so these shocks are the Bilstein Blackhawk E squared. And what that means, they have internals, actually they're externally mounted on the side of the reservoir, right over here, but they are mounted to the shock housing itself, and they are spool valves for both rebound and compression. They are continuously variable. They also have externally mounted reservoirs. If you look out front on the front here, this line, this braided steel line, goes to both left and right containers are right there on the front, just behind the skid plate. They never get damaged, and it's a huge reservoir. That's important because when you do the Baja stuff and you've got a lot of this bouncing around articulation, that oil will not overheat like it would in a traditional internally mounted reservoir. That's huge. Okay, as far as shock travel, we have 13 inches in the front, 14 in the rear. And for those guys keeping notes, that is 0.1 of an inch more in rear travel over the Raptor. So good job, Ram. You benchmarked well. Okay, something I want to point out is the actual shock body diameter is 2.6 inch on these. You'll find that on Raptors today, they're 3.1. So it is a little bit narrow body, but they can get away with that because of the externally mounted reservoir. So don't think that that's not as good. They've just packaged it better and kept the unsprung weight down. That's actually probably better. Now, speaking of sprung, that spring right there is huge, but it's linear. You don't see it being progressive. It's not spun differently at the top or the bottom. That gives it a consistent rate of travel. It allows the shocks to make up for compression rebound changes. Something else the shock has is an internal bump stop, a hydraulic internal bump stop. That's all about jumping and landing and not ripping the corner of the truck off. And we've seen these things fly. The press launch a couple years ago, these things were just everywhere going, everywhere flying. None of them lost a corner. Really impressive. Okay, heading out to the back, this thing has a Dana 60 rear. That sounds like just a number for some, but if you know the off-road world, that's a big freaking deal. You see those in Super Duties and 2500 Rams. In fact, a lot of this rear end is from the Power Wagon. It actually has a 5-link suspension design that the regular Ram 1500 has, but the control arms are bigger, they're longer, and they are stronger. They're designed to drag over things for off-road use. We've heard it drag going up our hill test and that kind of stuff, but it's meant to do it, and it has no problem getting it done. It is also 6 inches wider than the standard one. No big deal. The shocks, though, are different than the front because they're inverted. And what that means is that the shock piston is coming out the bottom of the housing, not coming out the top of the housing like it does here. The benefit there, again, reducing unsprung weight. The heavy end is mounted to the body instead of mounted to the axle itself. Little tricks. To make that possible, they had to build a beefy guard for that piston rod because it was just going to get killed off-road. And it works. We haven't heard any horror stories there. Now, back to that axle, it is full floating. What that really means is that there's a bearing at the end of the housing that supports the axle shaft and on the inside. What that means is you can remove the axle shaft without taking the whole hub off, and that's good for quick maintenance on the road in case something happened on the trail. That's pretty cool. You don't see that really anywhere else in the 1500 segment, the half-ton segment. I've never seen it. That's a big deal. Now, I told you there are 5 shocks. On the top of this rear axle, there is a parallel to the ground mounted shock. This end mounts to the differential and the front mounts to the chassis of the truck, to the frame. And that is all about reducing axle wrap and wheel hop. Why is that happening with the 4-link? Because they use soft bushings, big soft bushings straight out of the Power Wagon on the axle side of the control arms. They had to do that to get their articulation really good. And that's why it does better than the Raptor does on the RTI score, because it can really flex out big time. In fact, there's a cool gauge in the gauge cluster that shows you how much is torquing out. Something else it has is ride height sensors on all 4 corners and G meters on all 4 corners. This thing is tweaking what it's doing non-stop, and that's why it kicks ass off-road. So if you want to see that, check out our off-road hill test. If you want to see 0 to 60 times, check out that. We have that on our road test review. Let us know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.